the thing is,
Good morning. If y'all want to hand out the drafts, okay. Everybody ready? Well, I'm sure most of you, if not all, watched the presentation by President Zelensky to a joint session of Congress held in the auditorium. It was moving. It was inspiring. The video presented was heartbreaking. And I would imagine that the average American, if they had a chance to listen to President Zelensky and see the video, would want to do more to help the people of the Ukraine. The reason President Zelensky is doing this, he's trying to rally the world to do more. And the question is, can we do more? And should we do more? The answer is yes to both. Let's start with some common ground between myself and the Biden administration. I do not support a NATO no-fly zone. I understand the need from the Ukrainian perspective to stop the bombardment. It appears to me that Ukraine is holding its own on the ground. The big difference is air power, planes and missile attacks that have really been punishing to the Ukrainian people. But when the president and his team indicate that that would be an escalation that would involve the potential conflict between NATO members and Russia, he's right. That calculation may change in my mind about a no-fly zone, but as of right now, I support the president's decision not to go down that road, and I know that is hard for a lot of people to hear here at home and very disappointing to the Ukrainian people. But we have to make decisions based on our national security interest and not just emotional decisions. But I do believe it is in our national security interest to meet the request of the Ukrainian president to allow him, the Ukrainian people, to establish a no-fly zone. So while I oppose a NATO no-fly zone, I support enthusiastically the sending of MiG aircraft from Poland to the Ukrainian Air Force so they can be more competitive in the skies, and missile systems that are in abundance that could neutralize the Russian air advantage. They're S-100, 200, and 300 systems in former Soviet bloc countries, now members of NATO, that could be injected into the Ukrainian military that I think would help them maintain or regain control of their skies, or at least be competitive in the air. The MiGs. This has been a source of contention. It's sort of taken a life of its own, and this is a moment in history that everybody will be watching and judging how this unfolds, and we have a chance in real time to make a difference. On March 6th, on Face the Nation, Secretary Blinken was asked by Margaret Brennan, if, for instance, the Polish government, a NATO member, wants to send fighter jets, does that get a green light from the U.S., or are you afraid that will escalate tension? Secretary Blinken's reply, no, that gets a green light. In fact, we're talking with our Polish friends right now about what we might be able to do to backfill their needs if, in fact, they choose to provide these fighter jets to the Ukrainians. That was the position on March 6th. About 3 or 4 days later, I think March 9th, the position of the Biden administration was that the jets would be escalatory. I am urging the Biden administration to reconsider sending the MiGs, as well as additional air defense capability. I believe there's an overwhelming bipartisan support for that idea. I want to thank Senator Schumer and McConnell for allowing the war crimes resolution to go through the Senate yesterday unanimously, and President Zelensky mentioned that. So what we do here is followed by the good guys and the bad guys, And the fact that we could get a resolution through the United States Senate supporting an investigation of Putin and his military commanders as war criminals is very pleasing to me. I think it's sending the right signal at the right time, and Senator Schumer's remarks about the resolution are right on. I have talked to Democratic senators in the last 48 hours, and I think there's more than a handful of Democrats that would like to do something with the jets. So the bottom line is, while NATO no-fly zone seems to be a bridge too far for me and the administration, there is bipartisan support for sending a package that includes fighter jets and air defense systems to the Ukraine immediately so that we can have a Ukrainian no-fly zone manned by Ukrainian pilots and manned by missile systems in the hands of the Ukrainian military. So I have a resolution that I will introduce this afternoon, a sense of the Senate resolution urging the Biden administration to make the transfer of the 28 MiGs in question and to send additional air defense capability that we possess in NATO to allow the Ukrainians better to defend their skies. The state of play of the war, I think the Ukrainian military has exceeded every expectation. I think the Russian military has been underwhelming. Thousands of people have died in this conflict. I do not believe the Russian military's heart and soul is in this endeavor. How does this end? We cannot let Putin get away with this. After 20 years of murder and war crimes and thievery, it's led to this moment. Every time he did something outrageous, the world complained, but not enough. And now he has crossed a Rubicon where there is no going back. If he's still standing when this is over, then you can almost bet that Taiwan goes and that Iran will become more belligerent. So what happens here in Ukraine will shape the world one way or the other. A world where Putin wins is a very dark, dangerous world. A world where Ukraine survives against the atrocities being committed against him by Putin and his armed forces is a much brighter world. The video showed Ukraine before the Russian invasion. Peaceful, happy people. They had their share of problems. Corruption was rampant, is a real issue in Ukraine. But a people that were willing to live in peace, raise their children, and go on about their own lives in a peaceful fashion. And you could see the before and after views of this war. I'm just urging the Senate to speak with one voice, to meet the moment. We've been talking, we have written letters, but it's now time to take votes. And I would just say this, that if we had a vote on the resolution to supply the Ukrainian military with the MiG fighters and other air defense systems, it would be a shot in the arm to the Ukrainian people and their military. It would be a blow to Putin. And if we could do this soon, I think it really could help the outcome of this conflict. With that, I will take questions.
Senator Graham, can you talk a little bit about what it means to help Ukraine create their own no-fly zone? What does that mean? Would it be something similar to an Iron Dome in Israel?
Well, I think what President Zelensky is saying is if you can't do the NATO no-fly zone, and at this point in time, that to me is a bridge too far, because it would put us in direct conflict. He said, how about helping us control our own skies? As to my friends in the Pentagon, you told all of us that this war would last 3 or 4 days, that Kyiv would fall, that, you know, the country would be overwhelmed by the Russian military. They were wrong. So, quite frankly, I trust President Zelensky's judgment about what would help him in real time more than anybody else on the planet right now. He's proven a level of capability as a wartime leader. The Ukrainian people and their military have exceeded all expectations. So when he asks for MiG jets that his pilots can fly, that they're trained on, that Poland at least at one time was willing to give, I think we should honor that request. I know there are S-100, 200, and 300 air defense systems in abundance that could go in if we just made that decision. And I'd like to increase the drone capability of the Ukrainian military because they have been very effective with the Turkish drones, and I think we should be supplying drones too.
Senator, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned escalatory moves. Why is it that when the administration says that creating a no-fly zone, which you agree would be escalatory, but then sending MiGs, which the administration and some of the intel community testified to this on the Hill last week, would also be an escalatory move in the vision of the Russians? Why do you support one and not the other, basically?
Well, a no-fly zone enforced by NATO would put NATO members in direct military conflict with Russian forces. That's what a NATO no-fly zone means. Increasing the capability of the Ukrainian military to defend its own skies is very consistent with the Javelins and the Stingers.
Even if we're the ones giving them?
Yes, yes. These are not our MiGs. We don't have any MiGs. So these are Polish jets that are willing to be given to the Ukrainians that they can fly. It's a distinction that doesn't make sense to me. On March 6th, we're okay with it. So I think what happened here is I think Putin threatened the Biden administration, if you send the jets, it'll be an escalation, and he folded like a cheap suit. I'll say that openly. Now's the time to revisit that. I tell you this, that's just not me saying this. I am convinced if my resolution had a vote on the floor of the United States Senate, it would pass overwhelmingly, well north of 60 votes, with strong bipartisan support, because most of us see the distinction between NATO being directly involved and helping Ukraine with reasonable capability improve their own air defense system. This idea that somehow 28 MiGs in the hands of the Ukrainian Air Force would lead to an invasion of Russia by the Ukraine is nonsense. And the people who are telling me it's escalatory apparently didn't say much on March 6th when we green-lighted it. What changed? I think what changed between the 6th and the 9th was that Putin weighed in and backed the Biden administration down. We cannot let Putin determine what we do in terms of military assistance, economic assistance, and I think that's what we're allowing to happen.
Do you still stand by your call to have Putin be assassinated?
Do
you still stand by your
Yeah, I hope he'll be taken out one way or the other. I don't care how they take him out. I don't care if we send him to The Hague and try him. I just want him to go. Yes, I'm on record. Please understand, Senator Lindsey Graham, and if John McCain were here, he'd be saying the same thing, I think. It's time for him to go. He's a war criminal. I wish somebody had taken Hitler out in the 30s. So yes, Vladimir Putin is not a legitimate leader. He is a war criminal. He needs to be dealt with by the Russian people. I'm not asking to invade Russia to take him out. I'm not asking to send American ground forces in Ukraine to fight the Russian army. I am asking the Russian people to rise up and end this reign of terror for you and the world at large. That if you follow Putin, you're going to have zero future. I encourage what Zelensky said, that every American company leave Russia right now. Leave today. I encourage the world to strangle the Russian economy. Our war is not with the Russian people. In many ways, they're as much of a victim as Putin as anybody else. The young journalist yesterday who held up the sign, now that takes guts. People like that change history. So how do I think this ends? I think if we stick with it, that if we help the Ukrainians fight for their own freedom, provide them reasonable assistance on the military front to regain control of their skies, help them with food and clothing and economic assistance, and strangle the Russian economy, that there will be forces emerge inside of Russia to end this. So I think the world is better off without Putin. The sooner the better, and I don't care how we do it.
Yeah, there's a lot of other senators, Rob Portman, for example, who want much tougher sanctions. And, Zelensky talked about banning all Russian imports,
Yes.
not just oil. Do you think there's a chance of getting some bipartisan support there? Because a lot of Democrats say we need to work with our allies, and a lot of allies are resistant to cutting off all those Russian energy exports?
Well, I think we have a historic opportunity here to end the reign of terror of Putin. And the only way you're going to do that is get the Russian people to take matters in their own hands, bring about justice, turn him over to the international court. How would they do that? Well, they can't go to Starbucks. They can't go to McDonald's. There's a group of people in Russia that have come accustomed to a fairly middle-class lifestyle. Now, would this be tough on us? Yes, it would be. But yes, the Ukrainian ambassador called me up yesterday, begging again for the airplanes and the missile defense systems, but she would like to expand the sanctions to regional Russian leaders. She wants to throw a wider net around the Russian infrastructure that keeps Putin in power, and I support that. So I'll work with Rob to expand the current sanctions to a larger group of Russian officials. I will also see if we can expand the sanctions in a wider way in terms of just all economic activity. We need to isolate Russia as the pariah state that it's become.
You've said a number of times during this press conference that you don't support a NATO-imposed
Right.
zone as of yet. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what would have to change on the ground in Ukraine for your position on that to change, specifically things like chemical weapons attacks, anything else, what would have to change?
If there were a chemical weapons attack, I would change my mind.
Anything else, or other?
That's the one that comes to mind right now.
Were you disappointed a majority of Senate Republicans opposed the Ukraine aid package last week in the omnibus? What did you think of that?
I think that vote was probably tied to the overall funding of the government. I think if you'd had a separate vote on that, it would have been overwhelming. But your point is well taken. You know, we live in difficult times. You have to do things that you're uncomfortable with, you know, to show solidarity with the Ukrainian people. I wish we could have had 100 votes for this package. But if there had been a separate vote on the aid apart from the overall spending bill, I think it would have gained more support. But this is what I would say to my Republican colleagues. Let's don't send mixed messages. To my Democratic colleagues, you've told me privately, some publicly. I think Senator Blumenthal was on the floor yesterday supporting transfer of the MiGs. Senator Klobuchar mentioned that she would be open to that. So to both parties, we got a chance here to come together. I have stood by the Biden administration in terms of no NATO, no-fly zone. I know the Ukrainian people don't like hearing that. I know it's difficult to say given that video, but I think it's the right decision. I think the idea of backpedaling on the jets has done two very bad things. It's diminished the ability of the Ukrainians to control their own skies, and it sent a signal that we're not appropriately all in, that it had to be a boost to Putin and a blow to the Ukrainian military and people when we kind of backpedal. So I'm asking the Biden administration to reconsider.
Senator, have you heard whether the Biden administration is considering the use of these Switchblade drones or providing these Switchblade drones to Ukraine? And is that something you or other members of Congress might support if it were part of a military aid package?
I don't know what a Switchblade drone is, but it sounds like it should be going to the Ukraine.
Where they can like pinpoint,
I know
attacks.
what a Switchblade is. So, yes, ma'am. It's pretty simple. If they think it will make a difference militarily, let's do it. Now, if they ask for a nuclear weapon, I'd say no. But if, you know, they're asking for air defense capability, and drones have proven their worth. The Turkish drones have been wisely used by the Ukrainian military. Here's what I think will happen. The longer this war goes, and I don't see the Ukrainians giving up on their freedom, I think they'll fight to their death. The weather's going to change. The ground's going to get muddy. And the maneuverability of the Russian military is going to be substantially reduced. We see anecdotal stories of Russian units beginning to break. You see things inside of Russia changing, the holding up the sign. The fact that she was let out of jail so quickly tells me that there's some people in Russia that maybe are not all in for Putin. So the answer is yes to the Switchblade drones.
Can I follow up on
Well, you've had one. I'll get right back to you.
The jets aside, there's some reporting this morning and some leaders on the Hill have been saying that air defense systems are on the way to Ukraine now. Are you briefed on that?
I'm getting a briefing this afternoon at 3:30, and I appreciate that, and I hope that's the case. All I can say is that the request for the air defense systems has been out there for quite a while. We made a mistake as a nation not imposing pre-invasion sanctions, everything would be provocative. I thought if you told Putin up front, here's what comes your way, he might be less likely to do this. Uncertainty is a bad thing when you're dealing with bullies. The Chinese. Now, there's a report out that the Chinese are going to be all in helping Putin. I would expect that to be true. Birds of a feather tend to flock together. So if the Chinese begin to help Putin economically and militarily, then I think we should write down what we would do to the Chinese economy and let them read it for themselves. This idea of serious consequences is not enough. Let's don't make the mistake we made with Russia with China. So I would urge the administration to start drafting some proposed sanctions so that Chinese government would understand what they're getting in for if they tried to bail out Putin.
Can I follow up?
Yes.
Okay. Can you know, Senator Portman told me and a few other reporters yesterday that he would be interested in something like an Iron Dome over Ukraine. Is that something you guys have talked about and would be open to?
I think yes. I mean, so I've talked to the Israelis. I mean, you know, they have their own national security concerns, but let's look at it this way. The video shows the effect of air power more than anything else. You know, these buildings being blown up and the cities being ravaged is coming from the air. It's coming from manned aircraft and from missile systems. So an Iron Dome system would help neutralize the advantage the Russians have in the air. I cannot stress enough, I don't claim to be a military tactician or commander. I've been a military lawyer most of my life, and even I could convict Putin. I think my niece could convict Putin of being a war criminal. The control of the skies is the missing link. It's the big advantage the Russians have. And I am confident that if we inventoried the systems available to us, that we have and that our allies have, and we made a firm commitment to help the Ukrainians control their skies, we could turn the tide of battle even more than is being done today. What's missing here from the Biden administration is that they're worried about what Russia may do if we do something. Russia needs to be more worried about us helping the Ukraine. We're not going to have a nuclear exchange over this. This is a bluff by Putin. If we let him threaten nuclear retaliation every time we get in a disagreement, he owns the world. I am confident that he may be a murderer, but he's not suicidal. And I'm even more confident that the Russian people, particularly the general staff, is not going to commit mass suicide to help Putin, because nobody wins a nuclear exchange. So there's a moment in history here, a moment on the battlefield, that if we went all in providing Switchblade drones, Iron Dome type systems, 28 fighters, maybe never in the history of warfare has 28 planes meant so much to so many. That really is such a small contribution. To borrow a turn of phrase from Churchill, the Battle of Britain was won by brave fighter pilots against all the odds, going up day after day, being able to hold off the Germans. 28 planes. Will it turn the tide of the air battle? I don't know. Is it the most effective way to regain control of the skies? I don't know. But I know that President Zelensky believes it will help. And if we reverse course as a nation to give them the planes, it would create momentum for Ukraine and be yet another blow to Putin. Last question.
I want to follow up about the transfer of the MiGs. So part of what the administration said last week was that the Polish government was basically asking the planes to be transferred to Ramstein, and then they would, then the Ukrainians would get the planes. Is there a way that you see?
I'm not so sure that's the best way of doing it. In World War II, we had a Neutrality Act, and Roosevelt and Churchill were pretty clever. We came up with a way of taking World War II fighters to the Canadian border, and they would drag them across the border and send them to Britain. Here's what I believe. There is a way to get 28 planes into the hands of Ukrainian pilots if we want that to happen. Zelensky is saying to the world, not just, the ambassador to the world, that these planes matter. Please help me. If you cannot help me with a NATO no-fly zone, here's my second request. And it makes eminent sense that we have a lot of smart people in this country. We can find 20 ways to get 28 planes in the hands of Ukrainian pilots, not American pilots, to defend their skies. Thank you so much.